in Belgium, there were two brothers who were deaf, two deaf twin brothers. And at some point, they found out, they were both 45 years old, they found out that they were also going blind, and that in the not too distant future, they would not be able to see each other. They would never be able to see each other again. And so they made an extremely difficult decision, and that was to be voluntarily euthanized. We have a quote here. This is from Dr. David Dufour. Says, they had a cup of coffee in the hall. It went well, and they had a rich conversation. Then the separation from their parents and brother was very serene and beautiful. At the last, there was a little wave of their hands, and then they were gone. Now, this is normally where, in a Young Turks story, we would tell you about some sort of insane legal problem that's coming from this, or something went wrong. No, that's the end of the story. And that's why we're talking about the story. They voluntarily were euthanized. Mm-hmm. I mean, and now life goes on for everyone else.
Yeah, it's really, really sad. I mean, what a terrible luck. I mean, you are already deaf, and then you're losing your sight. I just don't, I just can't imagine. So your world is dark and silent, right? Yeah. The only silver lining, though, I see in this terrible story is that there was two of them. They were brothers, right? So whatever one was going through, obviously the other was going through the same thing. And I think it's kind of beautiful that they were able to share this awful experience. So at least they're not alone in that sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Look, I can't imagine being deaf or blind, let alone both. And obviously they shared a connection that goes back 45 years. Like the fact that they already had physical problems means they were probably relying on each other to a great extent. To give you some details about the laws on euthanasia in Belgium, more than 1,000 people allowed themselves to be doctor-assisted in committing suicide in 2011. Most of them were terminally ill, usually cancer patients. And they say that it's interesting that generally, the illnesses for you to allow to be euthanized, they have to be terminal. But there is an exception that allows over 18 patients who are mentally sound to be allowed to die if they are suffering. In this case, it's not a terminal condition, it's not a painful condition physically, but in terms of emotional and psychological trauma, it is, I don't know, it's quite
sad.
damaging.
And then the other thing is, I just kind of thought about it, is if they are deaf and they are blind, once they go completely blind, because they're already deaf, like they no longer can really, I guess they could write that they wanted to be killed at that point, or they want to be euthanized. So that was kind of the moment where they had to decide if they wanted to keep.
They could communicate if they wanted to, but they thought that their quality of life would be so severely impacted. Look, I'll be honest, although I have to admit, like I said before, I'm not in this position, I'm not in anything close to this position. I can't imagine what it would be like to be in that position. If I was, I don't think that I would allow myself to be euthanized. This came up last year when a Virginia college student was stricken by flesh-eating bacteria and lost the use of all 4 of her limbs. And I said that I wouldn't want to die in that case either, because I think that life is what you have, and it can be better or it can be worse, but that's all that you have, and there's no reason to leave.
I think that's so different. I mean, of course, losing all your limbs is awful and it's horrific, but you're still able to see and hear and speak to people. You're still alive, just like, you know, of course it changes the way you live your life, but you can still experience like all these conversations and connections with your family, whereas if you're blind and deaf, that's a lot harder to do, you know what I mean? So I don't know, it's tough. And I do think we're all, particularly in this country, like really obsessed with trying to keep somebody alive no matter what it takes. And at some point, I think keeping the person alive is more for those around them than that person. And I think that's unfair. At some point, you know, I have family members that say, like, if I am suffering and if I just can't do anything, just please let me go. You know what I mean? And I think that's the more unselfish thing to do, although I understand why people have a hard time letting go, obviously.
But the reason that we want to talk about this, as I alluded to earlier, was this is an example of when, like, if you were to transplant this situation to the United States, they would not have been legally allowed to do what they did.
Right.
And it's another case where what is literally a victimless crime is not allowed because of some lingering tradition or religious belief that you have, not the person who's actually being involved in it. That when we talk about things like being able to consume the particular type of drugs that we like rather than the particular type of drugs that you like, which might be in a liquid form as opposed to a smokable form, or to have sex with a prostitute who wants to engage in that behavior, or somebody who's suffering for years that wants to end their life, This is about that individual.
Right.
And we point this out, and this is a story that Hermela originally found, because it shows that it's tragic and it's hard to think about and it's hard to talk about, but it was their decision. They made it. The rest of the world continues. Why should it be illegal?